Репортажі про відзначення трагедії Бабиного Яру спонсоровані організацією «Українсько-єврейська зустріч». What's the reason to allocate so much attention to the Babin Yar tragedy issue?
Well, as it turns out, traditionally, when one thinks of Central and Eastern Europe in general, and people's minds are limited to, one might say, the 20th century, one thinks only of tragedies. And among the best known tragedies that the Western world is fully cognizant of, both through passive and active educational efforts, is the Holocaust. Ukrainian society, and in particular Ukrainians in the diaspora, who took the initiative, somewhat similar to Armenians who in the diaspora had taken the initiative for a much longer time, since their tragedy occurred in the waning years of World War II. Ukrainians, as I say, in the diaspora, beginning soon after the event, but in particular reached a new point in the 1980s, wished to bring to the attention of the world another tragedy of, in some ways, even greater proportion than the Holocaust in terms of numbers, and that was the Holodomor, or the Great Famine of the early 1930s in what was then Soviet Ukraine. But despite those efforts, the fact of the matter is, it is the Holocaust which is embedded and has been made to be embedded in the mindset of the Western world through all of the elements that we know, books, films, television programs, etc., etc. And in that context of this major tragedy in the 20th century, focusing primarily, if not almost exclusively, on the Jews of Central and Eastern Europe, everyone has heard the word Auschwitz. Holocaust, Auschwitz. 20th century, World War II, Holocaust, Auschwitz. Everyone knows this. Well, yes, Auschwitz is certainly a symbolic and important marker for the Holocaust, but it is one of many. And as scholars now have been studying to a greater degree the Holocaust, it becomes clear that there were kind of, if you will, two styles of Holocaust. There was deliberate murder, primarily of Jews and others, through methods of camps and death camps and ovens. And that was primarily in the kind of Western mode, even though most of these death camps were in Central Europe, some would say Eastern Europe. And then farther east, in traditional Eastern Europe, was something called Holocaust by bullets, killing, again, primarily Jews, not by shipping them off to concentration camps and then ovens, but rather by literally shooting them and then dumping them in pits. And one of the most symbolic examples of the Holocaust by bullets in Eastern Europe is a ravine outside of Kiev called Babin Yar, where soon after the Nazi German army invaded the Soviet Union, and including Soviet Ukraine, beginning in late June 1941. A couple months later, when they reached Kiev, then they carried out their policies vis-a-vis Jews and rounded up Jews, and on September 29th, 1941, began killing over a 2-day period in the 29th and 30th of September 1941 in this valley or ravines of Babin Yar outside of Kiev. Those first 2 days were devoted exclusively to killing Jews. Over 2 days, nearly 34,000. Subsequent to those 2 days, for the next 2 years, many more tens of thousands of Jews from other parts of Ukraine, as well as non-Jews, and a whole host of peoples, citizens of Kiev first and foremost, whether they were of ethnic Ukrainian background or Russian background, Roma, or Gypsies as we used to say, various other categories of non-desirables, racial or political. This includes Ukrainian national activists, Soviet prisoners of war. So Babin Yar became a killing field, a death field for the next 2 years at least, until 1943, when the Red Army returned to Kiev. It's the 75th anniversary. We know that earlier on in 2015 was the 50th anniversary, I believe, of Auschwitz, which major worldwide attention focused on Auschwitz. Well, what about the East? And what about Ukraine? And what about Ukraine as a country, a present-day country, and its position in Europe, attempting to draw closer to Europe, attempting to become a successful, democratic-oriented, post-communist society? Well, among economic changes and political changes, there is also the question of historical memory. Hundreds of thousands of people who themselves, or more likely their parents or grandparents, of Jewish and non-Jewish background, who derive from Ukraine, do have memory. That memory is continually reinforced about when programs are spoken about the Holocaust. And so it seemed appropriate that Ukraine, like Poland, with Auschwitz, do something to commemorate this tragedy in a proper manner, in a very respectful manner. And the Ukrainian Jewish Encounter, which itself a non-governmental organization based here in Canada, in Toronto, has been concerned with Jewish-Ukrainian relations over the long historical haul, if you will, felt that that part of its mandate would be to create a commemoration, in many ways to assist Ukraine to be thinking in this manner, and in particular to treat it in a international context at the highest level, and that effectively, if you will, is the motivation behind what began now 2 years ago in the planning stages to commemorate the 75th anniversary of Babyn Yar, which is taking place the week after next in Kiev. There are 4 programs of the Babyn Yar project, of the UJE Babyn Yar project, and those 4 programs are youth, public symposium, international landscape design, and the commemorative concert. Now, you've already mentioned the last 2, and so now asked about the other 2. So first, it's not only academic, because it's more kind of public intellectual outreach, if you will, but also there's a youth program. There will be, we have invited, as our guests, fully paid, well over 200 young people from North America, Europe, Israel, and Ukraine, of various backgrounds, who will spend 3 days, actually, out of that week in a series of small workshops, if you will, speaking about various topics, not just simply about Babyn Yar or the historical past, but various issues that are of present-day importance, including a session on the war in Ukraine. After all, the country, alas, is at war, and having access, however, at the same time, on other days, 2 full days, of a public symposium, where there will be both featured speakers, Timothy Snyder, Norman Naimark, the very well-known writer in Ukraine, Serhiy Zhadan, and these people will give talks and also have discussion around, moderated discussion around those talks. And so the youth, as well as the public at large, is open to that aspect. Then a bit more academic, if you will, to answer your question, there will be several panels on various aspects of Babyn Yar, in the arts, in remembrance, and which actually derive from something else, that is the appearance of a book, a new book that was commissioned for this event. It's about 360 pages. There'll be a Ukrainian edition and an English language edition, focusing exclusively on Babyn Yar. So that book will be presented, and many of the authors in that book, it's a book focusing exclusively on Babyn Yar, but it's multi-authored. There are 9 authors, I believe, and well over half of them will actually be at the symposium, either participating in panels or in the book launch. So that's the other academic component, if you will, of this activity.
Reports on the commemoration of the Babyn Yar tragedy have been brought to you by the Ukrainian Jewish Encounter.